Shalom and welcome to the European Report. Here we are in the European Parliament, in the heart of the European Union. And in today's programme, we will be discussing the 40th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution in Iran and asking what has been the consequences and is Europe really awake to the threat posed by the regime. And in this programme today, I'll be joined by Ruth Isaac, who is the ECI representative here in Brussels, and our friend of the European Report, Bas Belder, from the Netherlands, and also part of the European Conservative and Reformist Group, and Europe's top expert on Iran, and that is Paulo Casaca, former Portuguese MEP and founder and executive director of the South Asian Democratic Forum. So welcome to the programme. Firstly, welcome back to the European Report. It's always a pleasure to have you on the programme, Paulo. Can you really discuss the legacy of the 40th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution that occurred in Iran in February 1979?
Well, it is my pleasure, Simon, and especially to be here as well with Ruth and Bas, my dear former colleague here in the European Parliament when I was here up to 2009. Well, I think we have to look at this anniversary as something at least as important as the foundation of the international communism or of Nazism. It was a tremendous blow to all the values of humanity, what happened 40 years ago. We saw a regime being imposed in a population, first using or misusing the real dissatisfaction with the dictatorship that existed in the country, and making a lot of hollow promises and very rapidly showing that we were facing a new type of totalitarianism that is finishing with not only political freedom, which was the case in the Shah regime, but with freedom as such in every direction. It's really very difficult to say in the middle of all the horrific things that were brought from this regime what is the worst. But I think perhaps the worst of the worst is the way that they dealt with children. Because from the very start, one of the publicity campaigns, poster was a child that blew himself for destroying a tank of Iraq. And this was shown to be the ideal action for the children. So the suicide terrorism made by the weakest elements of society, starting with children, is at the core of this regime. To my knowledge, it's the only historic time when a country massively used its own children by busloads just to make mines explode, to allow the army to go and invade another country, because at the time it was already the situation had evolved, and it was Iraq demanding peace and Iran saying, no, we want to smash you, as they actually did with the unfortunate Western help sometime afterwards. So this is absolutely despicable. This is nothing that, this is not a side event. No, this is the core of this culture, which is completely unhuman. It is misogynist. The hate of women, it's high on the agenda of the regime, but not only women. I mean, children are seen as worthless and to be dispensable even with acts like that. No. And therefore, I think that all human rights-loving people must look at this regime as the most evil thing that we have on us.
Yeah, thank you for your analysis there. And Bas, warm welcome to the programme. Always a pleasure to have you on the programme. Now, when we look at Iran now, it's been 40 years since the Ayatollah Khomeini and the Iranian Shia clerics took control and power of the country. Since then, we've seen that Iran is the leading state sponsor of international terrorism, is the biggest abuser of human rights in the world, particularly targeting Christians as well. Not only that, we see that Iran is dominating the region and is wanting to develop nuclear weapons. So the world's most dangerous regime could have the world's most dangerous weapon. Considering this, what do you think of the statement put out by the European Council this week, really condemning Iran over its ballistic missile program and also its subversion activities in the Middle East and its influence on member states of the EU? Is this a step in the right direction, and is this the EU now following on from US policy under Trump?
Thank you, Simon, for being here and to be in such a good company.
Absolutely.
I think this is a very strange document, for it is again ignoring the link between the nuclear deal and what Iran is doing under the shadow, under the wings of the nuclear deal. The European Council is still not really reflecting how totally mistaken and misguided its Iran policy has been in the last years. What I've seen is here that there is no critical reflection about the nuclear deal and the American objection to it. But it's quite clear that this nuclear deal opens the way to an atomic Iran, a weapon atomic Iran. And when you are now also in this document are financing this regime because of the American position, and you are turning against the Americans, it is strengthening a regime that is remembered last week by one of his most famous authors at the moment, Amir Hassan Sheikh, who gives a devastating picture about the total corruption of the political elite and also of the society at the moment. And we are finding such a regime to uphold it in favor of its population, in favor of our the stability of the Middle East, of the security of, firstly, the State of Israel,
absolutely,
and then Europe. I think these concerns are not underbuilt with real measures, and that is taken a realistic stance and also being committed to what is going on next week in Warsaw, that there is a Western reflection on what should we do towards Iranian aggression inside its own country, inside the region and towards the Western world. It is totally misguided, mistaken, so I think it is very strange. Very strange. Only at the second half of this document, then you read the concerns and you are waving away the concerns by financing this regime. I think they are they will laugh in Tehran at this statement from Brussels. It is very weak and it is non-reflective. It is ignoring the facts. It is irresponsibility of political responsibility towards the Middle East, towards the State of Israel, towards our own security. Deeply disappointing, such ignorant and also such turning a total blind eye what is going on in the region and not being to put the hand in their own bosom. Which kind of process do we have activated, and are we still supporting?
No, absolutely. And Ruth, warm welcome to the programme. It's good to have you on the programme and representing the European Coalition for Israel here in Brussels. So thank you for the great work that you do here in Brussels. Without you, none of this would be possible. So we're very grateful. Ruth, you're very passionate about campaigning for women's rights. Now, when we look at 40 years of this Iranian regime, how do you fare that women have been protected under the Islamic Republic of Iran?
Thank you, Simon. Basically, first of all, I personally haven't seen the evidence. I'm very concerned because women's rights have actually gone backwards. Not only there is that mandatory or obligatory wearing of the veil, which some women don't want to, and therefore they are punished. But you also have a very strict adherence to Islamic law, which takes away children away from its mother. In case of divorce, divorce is only something that a man is able to initiate, and then the children can be taken away from the biological mother to be given to a new wife or whatever. Also, polygamy is allowed. Polygamy hurts women. It's something that I feel very, very deeply. A wife, no matter how many children she might have from one husband, she would always be neglected, or her needs will be neglected if there are 2 or 3 other women involved. And she has to share what she has, including her children, with someone else's children and resources. Can I just quickly also say what our very good friend MEP Bas Belder just said? Not only is very concerning the statement that the European Council just issued, our concern is what Iran has just said in response, because it specifically said that those are, the statement was very well documented. It was a legal document in effect, and they came back with something like, these are accusations, those are hollow and baseless accusations. So that means that they're completely dismissing the very legitimate concerns that Europe has regarding the Iran deal.
Yeah.
Very good.
But these concerns are too late and contradicted. So it is what kind of response? I'm deeply disappointed that you are so ignorant about what's going on, so idealistic.
Absolutely. And Paulo, would you say, as looking back at the past 40 years of the Islamic Republic of Iran, do you think it's achieved its main foreign policy objective, and that is to spread the Islamic revolution dominating the Middle East? Now that we see that Iran government in Tehran controls Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, in which they term it the Islamic Shia Crescent. In your opinion, what can the West do to stop Iran in its tracks?
Yeah, I think you are absolutely correct. Iran has in its constitution the duty to spread jihad all over the world, exactly following the new jihadist doctrine of Maulud Maududi, who is actually a mentor of Ayatollah Khomeini in the 60s. And Europe has been blind to this reality. Actually, one of the things I said at the time, most absurd things is to discuss the nuclear issue as if there was not an expansionist agenda linked to the nuclear issue. It's a bit like one would be negotiating with Hitler. Well, you will not build so many submarines, and in the meantime, Hitler was occupying Czech Republic, Poland, and so on. Well, never mind, but we are discussing that you will not get that many submarines. It's a bit like that. It's so absurd, the whole of the set of this agreement, that it really defies imagination with some insight. But, I think perhaps I would be a bit more optimistic than my dear friends, and especially my former colleague of the European Parliament. I think that the European diplomacy is trying to square the circle. I mean, they cannot admit that they were wrong. So they start by saying, oh yes, in the JCP was what we have to do, and we have an initiative to go around the extraterritorial principle of Mr. Trump. Then they say it, to say, well, yes, we stick, we don't, we did not lose the argument, but then, after they say this, they fundamentally say, yes, we were completely wrong. And we admit that everything that Mr. Trump was claiming is exactly what we have to do. Because the rest of the document is a confession that the strategy of the European Union was suicidal. Well, exactly on this point, for instance, of naming the very negative influence of Iran on the region, it is the first time that the European institutions are coupling both things, which actually they should have always have done. The two things, and of course human rights. I mean, You cannot separate one thing from the other. And I think that Iran is going after Mr. Trump, claiming all the time that Mr. Trump is terrible, is horrendous, is wrong, so on and so on. But in real terms, they are following completely. And this is very positive from my point of view, that they are following the United States leadership, and I hope the United States will keep a very strong position, because that's the only way to avoid a major disaster.
Excellent, thank you for your analysis. And Bas, in the last few days, the Islamic Republic of Iran's, according to my notes here, Brigadier General Hossein Salami, who's in second in command of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, has gone on and said that Iran's military strategy is to wipe Israel off the political map. And Iran is capable of destroying Israel within 3 days. These are his comments. But how can the EU be silent when a close ally of the EU has been threatened with genocide? What do you think the EU, in terms of policy, needs to do to actually counter these genocidal threats posed at a close ally of the European Union?
These very aggressive verbal attacks are nothing new. For key principle of the Islamic Republic of Iran is the annihilation of the state of Israel and its citizens. That is genocide. So, several years ago I was rapporteur for EU-Iran, and of course I also mentioned it. And there was a colleague from the socialist, she was Spanish, she said, oh, I hope that you have not too strong paragraphs on the Holocaust and on Israel in your report. So denying it totally. And what I hope for is that there is a policy of confrontation, of total rejection on all sides of the European institutions, and also to let them know the consequences. What I'm seeing is I'm totally in agreement with the Iran analysis of Dr. Matthias Kunsthal. What we are seeing is that for years Iran is blackmailing us. And we are let us blackmailed by, then we step out of the JCPOA and so on, and they still are going on. I'm not saying that we should blackmail them, but we should show them the consequences. And we show them, especially in the first place to the state of Israel here, that we are totally firm, stand behind them, that they have all the legal means to defend themselves against any threats, and we should take this serious. When you speak about concern, that should have be also here in this document. I did not see it, so there's a missing gap, a lacune. For then you are really, when you speak about and you want to play a big role in the Middle East under the umbrella of the two-state solution, and you are financing and you are helping and supporting, and you have friendly faces to a regime that is totally against this, because it is only one state that should emerge, an Islamic state there. And when you have contacts with Hezbollah, Hamas, the dead foes of the state of Israel, we should make up our minds at what side do we stand. And of course there are, as my dear colleague said, there are several levels of diplomacy. Let us hope that what he's saying is that is the beginning of a realpolitik, a real policy that defends our political values, our deeply values, human values, and the first state and the first people, nation that should be then be our concern is the state of Israel and the Jewish people.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And Ruth, back in December 2017, a brave Iranian woman called Vida Moghevdi, a 31-year-old mother, peacefully took to the streets. She took her veil off and waved it at the end of a stick to really enact a defiance against the government's imposed Islamic veil on women. Since then, she's been arrested and has become a symbol for Iranian freedom, particularly freedom for women. How important is it that female MEPs here in this parliament and, of course, women across the EU stand with her in a fight for freedom?
Obviously, it is very important, and we have seen some members of the European Parliament being very outspoken, including from ALDE, obviously EPP and the Conservatives. Unfortunately, not so much from the S&D, I would say, but we are hopeful that we're going to see more and more, and it's a matter of us making sure that we keep this in the agenda. And I'm very encouraged because in the statement by the European Council, the issue of women's rights and the treatment of women and girls in Iran was specifically mentioned. So I'm encouraged by that obviously they're taking notice. My disappointment, and I think as an organization, our disappointment is with the High Representative Federica Mogherini. She hasn't been as outspoken as we would have wanted her to be regarding women's rights in Iran.
Very good. And Paulo, looking at the security situation that is happening in Syria, the fact that the Iranian regime has something like 80,000 troops and militias under its control in Syria. It has moved up to about 30 miles between Israel's border with Syria, which is a direct threat. And considering that the Iranians have at their disposal the most dangerous genocidal terrorist organization known to man, Hezbollah, in southern Lebanon, with about 180,000 rockets and missiles aimed at Israel. Do you see the prospect of a war between Israel and Iran, knowing that Iran is trying to achieve that Iranian sheer dominance over the region, which ultimate goal would be to the destruction of Jerusalem?
I absolutely agree with what Bas just said a while ago, and this is by far the most negative point in this document, because just before this declaration we saw in the press that Ms. Angela Merkel, as to my knowledge for the first time, said clearly Israel has all the right to defend itself from prospective attacks from Iran within the Syrian territory, which was a plus in my opinion. And this concern is completely washed out from this declaration. And this declaration pretends to be, speaking about a dialogue and you make making the aggressor and the aggressed like being equal. And this is absolutely unacceptable. Bas is absolutely right. This is the vital point. Well, the genocide of whoever, of course, is unacceptable, but most in particular, the lighthouse of freedom, democracy, and human rights, that is Israel, is even more important than anything else. And what we are seeing is obviously an aggression that has been assumed. The leaders, several, you mentioned Soleimani, but not only Soleimani, several of the Iranian leaders have repeatedly said clearly they wanted to wipe out Israel from the face of the earth. They could not be more clear. And how can Europe not take a very clear position in front of it? This is unacceptable. And this will obviously bring awful consequences, because it's exactly like in the past. There are a lot of people that thought, well, they are going after the Jews, the Holocaust, but they will keep us, they will not interfere with us. And they were absolutely wrong. They will never stop. They obviously will want to start by their most crucial enemy, but they will never stop. And this is something that we cannot tolerate in this declaration. Bas, you are absolutely right in stressing this point.
And Bas, we have 2 minutes left to the end of the program. So considering that we've seen Iranian military activity here in Europe with the assassination of Iranian opposition, assassination attempt on some of Iran's opposition leaders in Denmark last autumn, combined with the fact that Iran is now developing intercontinental ballistic missiles that are capable of reaching Europe, when do you think that the EU and Europe are going to realise that Iran poses a national security threat to Europe?
I think what is very important was, I'm now speaking of my own country, small country, but there was a vivid debate among refugees, Dutchmen, these women with an Iranian background who said under which threat they are still living, that the long arms of the mullahs is still hanging on them, and they are still afraid who can you trust inside the Iranian community. And I think such a debate is the beginning of an awareness, a wake-up call for our politicians. What is happening on our European soil? What is the long arm of the mullahs? It was in 1985. There was a very interesting and gripping book of a poet, an Iranian poet in German exile, Said, The Long Arm of the Mullahs. It was 1985, and there was a very dark page of repression and murders inside Iran and outside Iran. And we are now in the same situation. So to be concerned of, no, we should take measures, and that are now taking. And I hope that there will be a close cooperation with Israeli intelligence, American intelligence, to thwart this threat towards our own soil. We don't need to be aware or be afraid of ballistic missiles. The murders are on our streets.
Absolutely.
Due to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and its commanders, also the intelligence apparatus. So,
my final word to you,
red alert.
to you, Ruth, is what can we do in terms of viewers is to raise awareness of the shocking human rights abuses against women, against children, and also the fundamental attack on Christians living in Iran today.
I share the concern, just like with MEP Bas Belder. I personally know Iranian nationals which live here in Europe, or some of them born here. To this day, they still fear Iran, and they fear for the future of their relatives back in Iran. There are people who are pastors who have been persecuted, spent 7 years at least, and then he's now here in Europe, but he's concerned because of his own biological brother, and therefore he has to be very careful. We as Christians and we as Europeans, we have to make sure that we don't allow Iran to take over, if you like, the agenda. Europe and High Representative Mogherini, the Council, we very much welcome this statement, and we hope that it will not just be talks. We have to keep on pressing for more action, because I think words are just words, but we have to be very specific. The actions that the Iranians is what they're going to understand, basically, and we have to make sure that both media and politically we have high expectations of Iranian people and the regime. We need human rights, obviously.
Ruth, Bas and Paulo, thank you for being my great guests on today's European Report. And I want to thank you today for watching this European report filmed here in the European Parliament, where we discussed the legacy of the 40th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution in Iran. And all we can say is that this is a great catastrophe on the Iranian people. This is a catastrophe upon the region, and it's time to stand up against the threat posed by the Islamic Republic of Iran. So thank you for watching today's European Report.